This is the story of whiskey, and I started right here in the heart of Tokyo. Around these streets are bars crammed with people imbibing the amber liquid. It'll be a fascinating journey, so come with me as I tell the story of Scotland's gift to the world. I'm going on a pilgrimage to find out why such a simple drink has come to mean so much.
Hi, my name's Jim. I'm from Scotland.
From the makers to the marketeers, and the chemists to the cocktail makers, and from the Highlands to Hobart in Tasmania. I'll be meeting the people and travelling to the places immersed in Scottish whisky's world story. This is the tale of an ancient craft that became a global colossus. It is the tale of Scotch.
The one country that has given its name unchallengeably to a product that is known and accepted in every corner of the world. Scotch, enjoyed by all peoples on all occasions.
For half a millennium, Scotch whisky has been made by the fermenting and distilling of water and barley. The spirit these ingredients conjure up is then filtered into oak casks and left to mature. It is a raw, simple recipe, and yet the result is a drink loved by millions of people across the planet.
The nature of distillation is that distillers use what grow around them. You know, so if you're in France, you use grapes to make brandy. If you're in Mexico, you use agave to make mezcal or tequila. If you're in the Caribbean, you use cane to make rum. In Scotland, Scotland's geology means we grow barley. So immediately you're talking about distillers having a sense of place and a sense of location, and their spirits are embedded within the ground and the soil, and I would also argue the culture of that place.
In simple terms, it's distilled beer, and you know, made from good Scottish barley normally, and nice, good water.
This is Scotland, as seen through whisky. Each light represents one of Scotland's 118 working distilleries. Each twinkle is where the alchemy happens and whisky is born. By tradition, there are 5 main whisky regions: Highland, Speyside, Islay, Campbeltown, and Lowland. Most of these distilleries produce malt whisky made from barley. Some of it is drunk as single Scotch, but most of it goes into blended whisky. And just as vital for blends is grain whisky, produced in 7 distilleries across Scotland. And when you view all of it together, from this perspective, it's truly breathtaking that a tiny country on the fringes of northwestern Europe produces an amber liquid that spreads around the world. No wonder Scotland regards itself as the home of whisky. It can feel as if that status is under threat from a number of pretenders to the throne. Fellow whisky giants like Japan and America are chasing Scotland's crown. Scottish distilleries are being bought up by multinational companies. And there is an energetic craft whisky movement with fresh methods of production. Scotch is at a crossroads. No pretender, though, will ever have Scotch whisky's greatest advantage: the way it is interlaced with the identity of an entire nation.
The production of whisky is sort of woven into the texture and fabric of the nation, from lowlands to highlands. You don't go too far without being touched by whisky in one respect or another, okay? So its footprint covers the nation.
It's a bit like in Canada, people talk about, oh, the Mounties are, you know, part of Canadian fabric, and the maple leaf and things like that. You have these symbols that represent a country, and I have to say, if ever there was a symbol that represented a country, Scotch whisky has got to take the top honours.
Passion, I think, is the one word. If somebody said, how would you describe, define Scotch? Passion. And that's from the people who create it, to the people who drink it, to the people who market it and package it. Passion is always at the heart of Scotch.
The writer, Charlie MacLean, described it as the blood of one small nation.
This is a drink of heartfelt sentiment and a character trait of Scotland itself. Yet the dram reaches our lips via a colossal global industry. In whiskey, there is money, vast amounts of it. And down the years, multinational companies, some from outside of Scotland and the UK, have bought up Scotland's whiskey distilleries. The largest is Diageo, a British company, which owned 28. Chivas Brothers, a French company, owned 15, largely concentrated around Speyside. And in fact, France is still the largest consumer of Scotch whisky in the world. Bacardi has another 5. Beam Suntory, a Japanese company, has 5, as do Thai and Philippine corporations. Large-scale Scottish ownership is sadly rare. William Grant has 5 distilleries, Edrington 4. And right across Scotland, you have the independents like Springbank and Campbelltown, or the new craft distilleries, which are part of a burgeoning scene. But there's also a sadness in the fact that as whiskey has moved so far from its homely origins, and that only a fraction of the vast wealth it creates stays within these shores. This is so much more than a drink. It's an industry. It's a brand. This is Stirling, the ancient capital of Scotland, and looking east from here towards Alloa, lying between us, is another capital. It's the capital of the biggest manufacturer of spirits in the world. And it's also the biggest manufacturer of Scotch whisky. And it's owned by Diageo, and it is, in effect, an empire. Diageo's Black Grange warehouse site stretches out over 250 acres and has the capacity to store over 3 million casks of whisky. There are 10 miles of roadway here, and Black Grange even has its own fire brigade. It is just one portion of this £50 billion drinks company.
Well, I think empire is probably a key word, because the growth of Scotch really went in parallel with 2 or 3 things. The first was the growth of the British Empire, colonial economy, Scotsmen travelling all over the world, taking a thirst and a love for whisky with them, which is really what promoted the earliest exports in the sort of 1850s and 1860s. And then from the empire, you have the growth of global economies. And Scotch whisky, whether people like it or not, is a global drink. It's Scotland's gift to the world. And it was...
That's a lovely way of putting it.
Well, it is, isn't it? I mean,
it is our gift to the world,
It's absolutely true. And along with that went, I think, another gift from Scotland, which was in the late 19th and early 20th century, astonishing visionary entrepreneurship. You know, the people like the Ballantynes and the Chivas Brothers and the Johnny Walkers and the Dewars, these guys who took this crofting thing, this wonderful drink, and had the vision to turn it into something on an absolutely global scale, which meant inventing things like, you know, what you're seeing today was invented about 100 years ago. The logistics on a huge scale that people never thought of doing.
Yeah, the fundamentals are still the same.
Absolutely
and
the
the
same.
process has been refined.
Yeah, process has been refined. But the thing about these early entrepreneurs, which actually is what you've been seeing as well today, they were obsessed by quality. They're obsessed by quality and obsessed by consistency. So how you make your stills, how you make your barrels, how you put your blends together is what's going to give you the drink that will conquer the world. And that's what they wanted to do then, that's what we do now, and we just do it at this huge scale.
Whether small distillery or industrial titan, whisky is underpinned by traditional craft skills. Whisky production will always need human hands. Despite its own size, Diageo seemed to know this homely truth, as I found in visits to their coppersmiths and then cooperage. Charlie, where are we going now?
So this is the copper shop where we fabricate all the copper stills. We obviously have to keep it separate from the other metals that we're fabricating in, so we don't get cross-contamination of the different materials.
They're beautiful beasts, aren't they? I love them.
They're fabulous.
I love the way the light catches them. You know, the burnished copper.
They actually look like sculpture.
They do.
They do. They're like what they are.
There are different shapes, and different shapes for different distilleries.
Yes.
So these are made to order.
Yes, these are for Manickmore. And if we went back, I'll have the original engineering drawings for these. So we don't have to design a still. We just replicate exactly what they've got in the distillery.
You have to touch it, don't you? because it feels alive. Really, really does. And hear the echo. Most of this is done by hand. Very little of it is automated.
Done by hand. Yes, yes. The shape of the still is probably the most critical part in the whisky making process. What happens is, as the spirit vapours run up, more and more of them will condense on the side of the still. They'll run back down into liquid and be redistilled. And the more times that happens, the lighter the character of the whisky you'll get. So,
and that will ultimately affect the final flavour of the
basic character of the whisky.
Fittingly, for a drink steeped in mythology, there seems to be little agreement about what exactly makes whisky's flavour.
You cannot make whisky unless you use copper.
But you would say that?
No. The scientists, the clever people have tried. Not me. They have tried in the past. It's got to be copper.
Right, tell me, how much do you think the copper influences the final taste of the whisky?
Absolutely. You can put it in barrels to get flavour enhancement, and copper determines.
You can put it in barrels. You have to put it in barrels, Charlie.
Yeah, but you can put it in different types of barrels to get flavour enhancement.
And you can put it in.
But copper's the most important part of the whisky making process. That determines the character of your whisky.
You're a hard man to argue with, Charlie.
The truth.
By law, all Scotch whiskies for the home market have to mature for at least 3 years, and the casks in which they're stored are all important. Used sherry casks made of stout Spanish oak have a special place in the Scotch whisky industry.
Tom, what are these guys doing?
Well, what they're doing here, David, is these are actually ex-wine casks that have been broken down and palletised. So basically they've been used in the wine industry. What the guys are doing is taking them off the pallets and putting them onto the barrows there. And typically we'll rise that cask. So you can see from that stave there, that's actually been a red wine cask. So what we'll do with that is, through the process, we will refire that cask and put a nice char on that cask. That's exactly what we're looking for. The cask is the most important thing for the whisky industry. That's where the whisky is matured, and that's where it gets its flavour and its colour from. It's very important to the whisky industry.
Now, you see, the copper workers, when they make the stills, would disagree with you. I agree with you. I think it's the cask that gives you the predominant taste in the whisky.
Yeah, I mean, the coppersmiths play a very important part, you know, for distinctive distilleries and getting the flavour as well. But for me, the important part is really the cask and how it goes through the maturation process in the warehouses. So it's very important for us.
What puts the flavour into a whisky are a lot of things, and sometimes you easily say that it's around 60–70% of the flavour comes from the barrel, from the maturation, from the oak. Could very well be, but the thing with producing malt whisky is that we really don't know exactly where the flavour comes from. It probably comes from the barley as well. Least of all, it comes from the water. I can probably say that.
We used to notice when we were nosing the whisky that if a man came on shift and he had a fight with his wife before he came on shift, his attitude to distilling was very different if he'd just come out having given her a nice kiss before he left. It was completely different approach, a loving approach on the one hand and a hateful approach on the other. And the whisky definitely, you know, reflected that kind of attitude.
You know, people who know their craft, they know when the spirit is right. They know when those casks are able to be reused or if they should have a stave changed. There's these little bits that are, you know, science is hugely important to it and we can't deny that. But humans and our impact on it and how each person makes their whiskey in their own way, or each distillery does, is still very important, I think, and that adds the slight magic to it as well.
I'm an advocate of the magic, but behind all the magic there is a logic and a science. But it is more about feeling and understanding the whisky and understanding the DNA of the whisky. For almost every cask we have got a fingerprint of how it's been developing over the last, 8, 9, 10 years.
Typically a cask will last in excess of 100 years.
You know, so casks will come in here, we'll rejuvenate the cask, and we might not see it again for 25 or 30 years. Then it'll come back again and we can rejuvenate it again. And it goes on like that. Okay, David, so this is the, as you can see, this is the cask that's been through the charring process. And you can see the nice char we've got inside the cask. It's exactly what we're looking for, a good uniform char.
It really is, it's really blackened, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really blackened,
and then you scrape that.
Well, that's it finished now, that's it ready for filling now. That's exactly what we're looking for.
So you'll put the liquor straight into that barrel now?
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
Since this has been in the furnace there, the internal flames, it hasn't been touched. It's only been sprayed with water to cool it down, and that's it.
Yes, that's it. What we'll do now is we'll put the cask ends back in the cask, retighten the hoops, and off it will go, and that'll be filled in the filling store today, and be back in the warehouses, if not tonight, tomorrow. And it'll lie there for another 5, 6, whatever years.
And this all ends up in my single malt whiskey.
That's what helps it, yeah. That's how you can sit back and enjoy it.
No wonder I like burnt toast.
We'd like to introduce you to a couple of the guys here. This is Paul. Paul's a third-year apprentice. And this is John. John's the tutor. David.
Coopering isn't for everyone. Obviously, a laddie who's got a good bit of strength about him, it helps. If you're a good build laddie, it helps. But when I started, I was tiny. I was a wee skinny thing. But that's what your apprenticeship's all about. For the 4 years, it helps build up your core, your body strength to become the end result as a cooper. It's not something that happens overnight. As I say, 4 years, that's been cut back. It used to be a lot longer, 5 years, 7 years. Even when my grandfather was a cooper, it was 7, sometimes 9. So as
But surely that was just an excuse not to pay them a full wage.
Well, maybe it was
rather than taking 7 or 8 years to train.
Well, a lot of the system was changed by machines, so a lot of the hand work was taken out of it. But what we're left with now is just the core. This is something that they really need to learn, because basically if they were wanting to go anywhere in the world, they'd be employable anywhere. They make a barrel anywhere, not just in Diageo.
Each year, the Scotch whisky industry adds £5 billion of value to the UK economy. Vital to Scotch whisky is the export market. This drink now reaches 175 countries. Over 1 billion bottles of Scotch whisky are exported annually at a value of around £4 billion. It also contributes £1 billion to the UK exchequer, with an average bottle taxed at a rate of 76% in VAT and excise duty. Whisky and tax have long ganged together.
The Mother of Parliaments. Its tentacles spread across the land, ensnaring all in their wake. They always have. And in the century after the Act of Union, this place grappled hard with the whisky industry. What Westminster wanted to do was to curb excessive drinking, while at the same time reap the revenues from whisky sales. So, throughout the 18th century, Westminster churned out legislation that entangled distilleries large and small. So therefore, Islay, Campbelltown and Speyside, the whisky making went underground, so the amber nectar became moonshine, and Scotland's illicit stills flourished.
While the taxed industry ploughed on, the moonshiners thrived. Hidden from view and hard to reach for the dreaded excise man, illicit distillers perfected their craft. Theirs became the whisky drunk not only by crofters, peasants and the urban poor, but by the aristocracy too.
The illicit whisky was seen as the true quality, so it was asked for in King George IV's visit of Scotland, 1822. Sir Walter Scott very carefully staged marriage, and the king asked for a drop of the real Glenlivet, long in the wood and long in uncorked bottles. So, you know, street cred was pretty good. He was asking for Glenlivet. And from that, the reform of the distilling arts were speeded up by the landed gentry, who wanted to see an end to the illicit distilling, but saw that there was a way of improving their estates, etc., and controlling it, of course.
In the 1820s, law changes eased conditions and taxation and turned the old centres of illicit distilling into booming legitimate whisky areas. Among them, Campbelltown flourished. This is Campbelltown. It was once whisky mecca, for in its heyday it had 34 distilleries. Sadly today, there are only 3. Up every alleyway was a portal to another distillery. The air must have hung like a strange perfume, heady, intoxicating, delightful. You know, you can almost sense the ghosts of distilleries past. Campbelltown Loch, I wish you were whiskey, were the words of an old music hall song, and it might just as well have been, because this bay would have swarmed with ships, ready to take the liquid delights from Campbelltown out across the oceans to the rest of the world. Campbelltown thrived thanks to its deep natural harbour, rich raw materials and ready access to the ocean, and therefore export markets. In Victorian times it was nicknamed the Whisky Metropolis. Then after World War I, a dreadful combination of factors all but ended whisky making here. This is the shell of one of the 34 distilleries that used to exist in Campbelltown. The ghosts of whisky past. And the only spirits that are here now are the spirits of the whisky makers of bygone days. God, I bet these stones could tell a tale or two. Campbelltown had produced too much whisky, much of it low in quality, at a time when consumption levels were falling. Once more, natural resources were running low, and the railways that helped roll Highland and Speyside whisky out to the markets never arrived here. It's time to find an antidote to that tale of woe, a place where the best of Campbelltown remains well and truly alive. This is Springbank Distillery in the heart of Campbelltown, and it's a very unique place I've always wanted to visit. For a start, it has been owned by the same whisky family for over 200 years, and also every single part of the whisky making process, from the malting, the distilling, the maturing and the bottling, is all done on site, and I'm going to witness the whole process. Springbank is at the centre of the community here and employs more than 70 locals. Today I'm joining them, having enrolled in one of their whisky schools, under the capable guidance of Kerry, who has worked her way up from shop floor to distiller. Kerry, how long has this been soaking?
This has been soaking for 2 days, 12 hours at a time. So the first time we'll soak it for 12 hours, we'll leave it to dry for 12 hours.
Leave it dry in here in the tank?
Yep, and then we'll refill it with water, 12 hours, and then again dry for 12 before it's laid out onto the floor.
Tip up.
You tip it up, you cool it water, you tip it.
Starch in the barley is being modified so that later in the process it will become sugar. The new barley is wet and warm. In 3 days, some whiskery roots appear. After 7 days, it's almost ready for the drying.
As the barley dries, it is regularly turned to help its germination.
You'll see it actually lifting from the bottom and throwing it over, so it's turning.
We've been making whiskies, most of us, for a long time. So, yeah, it's part of our rhythm of life. The year goes round in a distilling year, very much like a farming year, which we're connected to. The crops are being put in just now. We'll be watching the progress of the barley throughout Scotland for the next few months. We'll watch the harvest, etc. And, yeah, it's just... I live in a village where there's 10 distilleries, so I can't help but meet bumping into folk that are involved in distilleries.
Being a student of whisky made me realise the amount of hard toil that was into distilling when it's undertaken traditionally, as it is here at Springbank. You earn your dram.
She's quite steep.
Ooh.
You smell it, smell the peat, smell the smoke. So this is the first half we put away this morning. This is the second half just dropping in now. So what you've seen from above, this is where it's dropping into.
That's coming off the conveyor belt upstairs.
Exactly, and dropping in, yeah.
A conveyor belt transports the barley into a kiln, where it is either dried or smoked with peat, depending on the type of whiskey being made. As we're making a batch of peaty whiskey, it's time to light the fire.
I'm just about to set Springbank Distillery on fire.
It's this peat reek, an essential part of the process which helps to give the malt whiskies their individuality. The dried malt is stored ready for use. A grinding mill, the first of many modern machines in today's process, replaces the two flat stones used by our great-grandfathers. The malt is reduced to grist, coarse, medium, and fine.
Next, Springbank veteran Gavin takes me to the Porteous rolling mill, where the peat-smoked barley is ground down to become grist.
It's easier for the water.
Then a process called mashing takes place. In a mash tun, the grist is mixed with hot water to change its starch into fermentable sugars.
Ooh, there's life going on in there, isn't there?
The sugary liquid produced, called wort, is then put into wash bags. Yeast is added and fermentation begins, resulting in a beer-like liquid known as wash of around 8 to 10% ABV.
They'll go around eating up all the sugars, converting it into alcohol.
But you know, the whole thing's live. I mean, that's an organic process going on here, gurgling and bubbling. It's quite ferocious, more powerful than I thought.
You get the vapours from that, eh?
Really get the vapour.
Clear the sinuses.
Whoa.
This wash is transferred into copper stills, heated and then distilled twice to create clear, new-make spirit.
Must be some heat in there.
Springbank has a wonderful old-fashioned atmosphere and traditional way of doing things, even down to the warning bell that tells the workers that everything is running to plan.
Hazelburn's 1, 2, 3. But the Springbank's at 1, 2.5.
The distiller must be able to judge exactly which part of the spirit from the second distillation is to be retained as new make, checking on its progress as it runs through the spirit safe.
Now, do you do it when you know when the middle part is ready? Do you do it by taste or by smell or by sight?
It's all done by temperature as well when it's coming in, but you'll know as well it'll be cloudy to start when they're checking the glasses, and then when you go into clear spirit, the first 45 minutes is bad, as you call it. That's all your sort of bad spirit. We don't take that.
Will you recycle that?
Yep, that goes back into your fates. As we're Scottish, we don't waste anything. Everything gets reused right down to 1%.
Getting near the end of the process, Gavin.
The cask will sit here. You'll lift this up. It's just like a petrol pump. When the spirit hits the bottom of the nozzle, it cuts out. And it records on the meter there how many litres is going in the cask. And then from here, it's taken to the warehouse and stored for maturation.
Once the new make has been filtered into oak casks, it is left to mature for 3 years and a day. Only after which can it legally be called whiskey. Single malts like Springbank, though, are usually matured for at least a decade, and often much longer.
I never knew it was that easy to break open a cask of whiskey. Slash.
These days, on-site drinking is usually confined to visits and open days. a core part of many a distillery's business model. Springbank's open day takes place once a year and is attended by people from across the world.
I'm attending Springbank Whisky School, which is great.
And have you learned much from it?
Yeah, even that. I thought there's not too much they could tell me, but yeah, I've learned a lot from it. Coming to Scotland in 1992, I was just over the age where I was allowed to drink, and I didn't have much money, so I visited 4 distilleries because at this time it was free. Today it's a big business, but no, at this time it was free, it was marketing. So I visited 4 distilleries, got 4 great drams, saw every time the same and thought, why are these drams different? And that got me into wanting to know more about this drink. It's my 18th time coming to Scotland now.
18th?
Yes. I'm also coming for other reasons, for the people, for the landscape, for everything. But whiskey is still the main reason for me to come here.
Springbank is special. It is as close as Scottish distilleries get to the original model. The place is rooted in the local community, something that shows in the merry band of workers who get the whiskey into bottles and finally to market.
Shoot bottle for Springbank bottle. Even if you hold it up that way, even if there was a blemish on the back, you can see it right through.
Did that put 2 labels on? Would anyone know? Have you got to feel? Don't tell anybody, mate. Keep it. My secret's safe with you. Thank you. That's the best birthday present I've ever had, honest.
The Highland malt whiskies used in any Scotch blend of real consequence must each be aged in oak. Scotch in the bottle will never improve. There is another magic secret in the creation of an outstanding Scotch blend, and that is that there must be a combination of many individual distillates if there is to be a well-rounded, tasteful, distinctive Scotch of best quality.
While Springbank thrives on its single malts alone, the strength of the whisky industry has, in fact, long been built on the back of blended whiskies. A blended whisky contains many single malts and, just as crucially, grain whisky. It was a technological development in the distilling of grain that changed Scotch whisky forever. Though makers had long blended their wares, mass production of blends became possible after 1830. That year, an Irishman, Aeneas Coffey, refined a Scottish invention, the continuous still. His development, creating what is now known as the coffee still, meant grain whisky could be made on an enormous scale and at low cost. From the 1850s, it was mixed with single malts to create blends, and trailblazing Scots peddled them across the world.
So you had a generation of Scots entrepreneurs who grabbed these technological changes, who looked at the evolution in the marketplace, who looked at the legislative changes and said, we can come up with a product that fits better in the marketplace. And so the DNA of the great blends goes back to those days. So there was a Mr. Buchanan, there was a Mr. Haig, there was a Mr. Walker, there was a Mr. Dewar. And so a Dewar's blend today, a Walker's blend today, has its roots in what Mr. Dewar or Mr. Walker did historically in the mid and late 19th century. So Walker, for example, always had at its heart West Coast whiskies. Dewar's blend always had Perthshire whiskies at its heart.
Going from the background of having licensed grocers that blended tea, so had this ability to take different flavours and characteristics and blend them together, and then started blending whiskey. And then you begin getting these individuals that start really travelling the world extensively and selling our wares and going out there as pioneers. And, you know, there's a number of well-known brands nowadays which are blends that all carry people's names. And to be able to tell to international visitors when they come in, this is not a name that we made up, that some marketing agency 10 or 20 years ago thought, oh, that sounds like a great Scottish name, and that sounds like a nice picture, and let's put that. It's true. It's genuine, authentic heritage. And these are the people that made the blends. These and their families and their ancestors were these people that actually took them to market, that were these pioneers, that in some cases were these eccentric characters. And that, I think, is, again, one of the cornerstones of Scotch whisky, and what makes it so successful in terms of its competition, is that it has this real authenticity behind it in these huge international brands.
The ingenuity of these blend pioneers met with a vital piece of good fortune for Scottish whisky when in 1871 the phylloxera virus destroyed French vineyards.
With the vineyards destroyed, little or no brandy could be produced. And so whisky, which up until then had been the drink very much more of the working man, was allowed to move into that space in the market that had hitherto been taken by brandy, which was the drink of the middle and upper classes, who would not have touched whisky. But along came branding to make it more acceptable, blending to make the product more palatable, patriotism to make it an acceptable thing to drink, and a shortage of supply of brandy.
The most popular middle-class drink in London at the time is brandy and soda. All of a sudden you've got Scots and the Irish going, hello, we can actually do that as well, you know. And they'll reformulate the blends to make sure that it does go with soda or ginger ale or whatever. So that's all of a sudden you've got popularity, you've got middle-class respectability, you know, and that's the way any drink is built. As long as you've got a middle class behind you, you're going to be fine.
With the vineyards barren for another 25 years, Scotch whisky now only had one rival competitor, Ireland. Prohibition in the USA became a victory for Scotland.
Various bootleggers head across to Ireland and they knock on the door of Mr. Jameson, Mr. Rowe, Mr. Power, and they go, listen, guys, you know, ship the stuff to Canada or to Bermuda or whatever. My friend Mr. Capone here, you can trust him. He will ship it in for you. You will have done nothing illegal. All you've done will be shipping to somewhere where booze is legal. And the Irish distillers, to a man, said, be gone with you. And they then moved from Ireland across to London and up to Glasgow to all the blending houses and said exactly the same spiel. So how much exactly do you want?
Increasingly, Scottish blends were made for American tastes, lighter and suited to being drunk with a mixer. One such blend was Cutty Sark, created in 1923 and now made alongside famous grouse by Edrington in Glasgow's Drumchapel.
This is Drumchapel, where I spent 10 years growing up as a boy. And in contrast to the tenements of the east end of Glasgow, it was a paradise. But now, it is home to famous grouse whisky. It has changed a lot in those years. Now, I often think that the magic and the mystery of whisky is in the soil and the barley and in the water and in the hands that make it. But actually, there is a very profound science behind the making of the drams that we know and love. And when I tell you that 90% of the whiskies we export around the world are blended whiskies, then you will understand the need for that science. And I'm about to look into it.
Kirstine Campbell is master blender for famous grouse and Cutty Sark.
Kirstine, you're a noser and a spitter. What a hell of a way to make a living.
Well, yeah, I guess it is, but we are referred to as nosers within the industry, and the majority of my work is done by nosing, but you're quite right, we do on occasion have to taste the whiskies, but when you're looking at up to 600 samples a day, you couldn't possibly taste them all, so that's where the elegant spitting comes in.
So you spit into a bucket?
Yes, we do, but it's really just at the final stage where I tend to taste the whiskies, or if I'm developing new ones. Otherwise, it's all done by nose.
So the nose is really important, isn't it?
Absolutely, yes, yeah.
So tell me the process you go through, because you see, I'm a single malt man. I live and die by single malts. And I think blended whiskies for biling your tatties in. I know, you see, that's sacrilege to you. So convince me of the beauty of blends.
You know, you need to be open about blending and rejoice in blending, and it's a creative process. It's not just a matter of taking this distillery and that distillery and some grain whisky, bunging it together, and you're going to get the same end result, because distilleries open, distilleries close, and companies fall out, and stock supplies, or they might have a surplus, might have a scarcity. And each cask is going to be different. So what a master blender does is actually look at all the possibilities that they have in front of them and tweak that recipe. So they might have a recipe, but it'll be tweaked every single time a vatting is going to be made. There might be a little bit more grain, there might be a little less of that first fill sherry, there might be a different distillery coming in, or combinations of different distilleries to produce the same overall effect. You know, and when you go into a blending lab, and you get that explained to you by a blender, you know, you kind of, your head kind of explodes. You go, how do you keep all this information, you know, within your brain? How do you learn all of that? How do you know that this whiskey and this whiskey, when combined, will give that result? I mean, that's just mental.
I hesitate to compare it with a box of Kellogg's cornflakes, but when you buy a box of Kellogg's cornflakes, you want it to be exactly like the last box of Kellogg's cornflakes you bought, and you want the one after that to be the same again. So you want your bottle of Bell's or Dewar's or Walker, whatever it may be, to be consistent to what you as a drinker have come to accept.
What I've got here to take you through, David, is really the process from new make spirit, because my job begins right back at the distillery stage where we look at the quality of the spirit before it goes into cask. Then move on to the cask types and the importance of the flavour that develops during that important time period during the whisky. And then how we bring all these complex flavours together to produce the same flavour of blend time in, time out.
Had you not have had blenders, you would have had a fairly rustic cottage industry, which would probably have never got to the stage it was, because a lot of the products that were being made in the 19th and early 20th century were very difficult for people to drink. Blenders sort of democratised whiskey by making it more accessible from a flavour point of view.
How many whiskies will be involved in each blend?
Well, it can vary actually, because for our blends we have core whiskies that we use each and every time we put the blend together. And then there are other whiskies that we put into flavour categories, and we can pick within those flavour categories perhaps one or several within those, so that's why it can vary from blend to blend, but ultimately the flavour of the whisky must be the same every bottle we put out.
Now, that must be really difficult to sustain.
That's part of the training.
That's the
and
challenge.
The experience, yeah.
I am astounded by the fact that 90% of all Scotch exports are blends.
Absolutely.
I seriously am.
Yep.
I mean, 90% all over that, home and abroad.
The numbers are huge, and personally speaking, for me, that's within Edrington and our blends. I'm responsible for over 50 million bottles. So yeah, it's huge numbers we're talking. So
I'm a massive blended whisky fan. I just think that going forward, blended whisky is going to have to keep up with the expectations that consumers have that are being set by other products. It hasn't quite caught up yet, but from a production perspective, it's so enormously creative that it absolutely will do. It's just waiting for people to sort of do it.
Really, really does.
While Christine guided me through some of the whiskies which go into her blends, the full list remained tantalisingly confidential.
So that's us covered 5 new make spirits, everything from a light grain through to a heavily peated malt. Now,
those are your basic ingredients.
These are some of the basic ingredients that go into our blends. Yes, yeah, top secret. These are the ones that I'm going to share with you today.
You're not going to share with the ultimate secret?
Not all of them. I can't possibly do that.
Away you go. Come on.
Can't possibly.
Your secret's safe for me, Christine, honest. I'm an incurable romantic, and I like to think that, you know, the production of whiskey is an organic, creative, mystical kind of process. But it's got a sound base in science, hasn't it? Especially if you're trying to achieve the consistency of quality and flavour in a blend.
Yeah, you have to have both. We do a lot of research, and there is a lot of background science into how maturation performs and that type of thing. But ultimately, at the end of the day, there isn't an instrument that's as sensitive as a human nose, so it requires us as blenders to be there at that critical point of blending the product to know how the flavour, and it's a lot about how flavours combine as well. You know, a machine can't tell us that.
The master blender is the person who sort of he marries these two positions together and creates the whisky. So I think master blenders are essential because they're this sort of meeting point. They gather up everybody. They gather up these sometimes opposing ideas that are actually part of the same process but tend to get a bit lost and bring them together.
I have always been a snob in terms of whisky, and I've always dismissed blended whisky. You're the first person in my life that's convinced me otherwise. Stop, Heyman, stop being a goddamn snob in terms of the whisky you drink. Thank you.
I'm delighted you've said that.
Across the world, millions of us hold dear the romance that surrounds Scotch whisky. But as Kirstine's work demonstrates, this drink has long been underpinned by science. The making of alcohol was first studied at Edinburgh's Heriot-Watt University during the early 1900s.
Okay, so now for the second stage.
I'm joining today's students in what is now known as the International Centre for Brewing and Distilling, or ICBD.
Welcome, first year brewers and distillers. This is your first kind of congregal meeting together in one room and to have you make your first whisky. We're going to do 2 distillations today. We're going to be doing a stripping run. And all we're doing in the stripping run is stripping all the alcohol out. So we're going to take our raw material, our 8% ABV wash, and we're going to take all the alcohol out and turn it into yet another raw material. Have a smell and pass it round. It's an interesting blend of science as well as craft, because there's still many mysteries in the whisky industry we don't know about. So there's things like going on in the still, chemical reactions, interactions between different chemicals inside the still, as well as in the maturation process in the cask. So I've always been a bit of a science kind of geek, if you will. So it's an interesting combination of that science, then combined with that slight element of mystery and of craft, that the whisky brings those 2 elements, or many elements, together.
So what's the end product of all your work and your research?
Oh, it's to increase the consistency of the product, but without losing any of the rope. We recently had a meeting of minds at Holyrood, of all places, at the Scottish Parliament, and the SWA, the Scotch Whisky Association, the people who look after what is Scotch whisky. And one of the key takeaway points that struck a chord with me was the fact that there is an ageing demographic in the distilling industry. Here at the ICBD, we specialise in providing the young blood for the industry. Note that in my notebook, and may fill out all the relevant, truly exciting paperwork. It's time to make your mind up, Simon. I'm going to offer you've got 4 different options. You've got European oak, which is going to be your sherry cask alike. So these are all
just as a distiller must choose which type of oak barrel to use for maturation, the students are offered a selection of wood samples.
Exciting things that help to add the other notes in and around the distillate we're making today. So of all the tools in a distiller's armoury, it's the distiller's nose that is one of the most powerful tools at their disposal. Think about what you're actually smelling.
Pouring the new spirit into a makeshift glass and oak barrel was left to a refined, more senior student.
Well, a historic moment has been had. Thank you very much for doing the honours. All we need to do is put this on here and then commence some very fiddlesome screwing on techniques. And we have our first ever fresh as whisky, ready to be opened in 3 years and 1 day. So thank you very much for coming and spending the time with me. And it's taken a little bit of work to kind of get everything together all at the same time. And thank you for sharing the experience. And I hope to be around when you guys crack her open and we can toast the dram together.
Probably too young to remember my first whiskies, because I think it was used for my first teeth.
The honest answer is no, I can't. It's lost in the mysteries of time.
The whisky was Ballantine's.
I was quite young because my dad used to make me hot toddies, but he used to make me hot toddies with Macallan whisky because that was his favourite drink. And it was one of those weird things. To me, that was what whisky tasted like. And I remember being at a friend's house when I must have been about 11 or 12, and her grandfather deciding that I could play with his grandchild because my father drank good whisky.
My first taste of whisky was with my grandmother in Inverurie when she gave me a little thimbleful of Glengarry, 8 years old, and this would have been in 1977, and I was only 8 years old.
I think it must have been at New Year, because that's the only time we ever had whisky in the house. And I think probably my grandfather insisted when I was 15 or 16 that I should have a wee dram and not be put off with a sherry.
When my journey continues, I'll be visiting Islay to find out how landscape affects Scotch. Taking the water of life on Speyside, Scotland's Whisky Republic, examining the booming markets of investment and collection, learning inside tales of wealthy connoisseurs, and revealing the marketing magic which sells Scotch and Scotland to the world.